they think in a positive way and thereby start some difficult conversations. So art is often an antidote. And many times when we try to change the conversation about racial injustice or race or police brutality or any of that, many times when we try to change that conversation, we look at art that initially makes us puzzled because the art is trying to challenge us to kind of think about how we see things. So let's take a look and see what's happening. Cool? All right. So what we have here on the left of the screen is a kissing Kande, and I kind of like saying kissing Kande. There's a click there. And these are power figures. What happens from the Congo is that these power figures have nails driven into them, and each nail is accompanied by a prayer. So this nail is very powerful. Iron is powerful. The act of driving a nail in is powerful. When we have the religious idea of driving a nail into a figure, you know, Christ on the cross, you would not want to be the person driving the nail into Christ's hands, right? But this is a very different approach to driving a nail in. In this case, the nail is imbued with power. It's imbued with a prayer. You can see on this figure that there's some fetishes attached, like some prayer bags attached. Sometimes dirt is thrown at it to kind of symbolize bringing the spiritual into the earthly realm. You will often also find that the eyes are reflective and the belly is reflective. It might be shell, it might be mirror. And this is the idea that when you look at it, it looks back at you. So you see yourself reflected in this power figure. So there's this really cool guy named Nick Cave who did the piece next to this. And this is one of his first sound suits. And he made this sound suit, as you can see, for Rodney King, who was killed by police. And he said that he was initially really traumatized and troubled by Rodney King's death. And he started just kind of picking up twigs and natural objects. And he started building things for them because he saw these twigs and discarded objects like discarded silk flowers as being emblematic of something beautiful that had been discarded, like a beautiful person or a life that had suddenly just been cast away, like it's just nothing, you know? So he starts building these structures, really thinking about the death of young Black men. And he made these sound suits. A real person gets inside of them. Now, at first you think sound suit, that's kind of a weird idea. When they move, they make sounds. So there's like, in the case of this, there might be a rattling of the twigs. But let's look at this Burkina Faso piece. Now, in a lot of tribal cultures, what happens is you take on a spirit. And as you might have read in the previous page, there's a nomo that comes through you. That's a Dogon belief. What a nomo is you get your ego out of the way, and the artist becomes a conduit or a pipeline for something fiercer, bigger, more important. And so here you see that there's a mask and a costume, and you see the Afrocentric idea of there's people around, there's call and response, there's music, there's dance, there's movement, there's interaction, and there's this spirit that comes alive. Now, in the Western tradition, you have representational art or realistic art. And the Nomo idea, if a spirit wants to be born human, it'll be born human. So why would you want to make something human because that spirit has already been human? So oftentimes the spirit looks very abstract. It might be the spirit of growth or the spirit of a harvest or the spirit of celebration. And so things like that are a little more abstract. So the masks and the dance and the rituals that you are seeing are to bring this more abstract spirit, but it's calling the spirits up, and it's very spiritual. And there's a ritual that calls forth a spirit. And because spirits are from another world, these rituals and dances allow you to kind of get into an altered state to experience something different than the real world. So when you see Nick Cave's sound suits, what you might see is something like this. And I think when you compare it to the Burkina Faso piece, you can really see some similarities. In this particular piece, there was graffiti on all the walls, so there's street art. So it's all this energy of people on the street that have kind of left their mark. And then you have these tall figures that shake and move, but kind of make sounds as they do. And boom boxes are playing music. So you have rap, or you have hip hop, or you have something like that. And I thought what might be interesting when you're looking at these, for instance, the one on the left that you see here, if you look closely, they're kids' toys, and they're like tops and things that spin. Like at New Year's, it might be like, or la, 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 la. And so when a model puts on this sound suit and starts dancing, there's all of this clanging and this noise and this rhythm, and that kind of sound draws the spirit up. You can't help but notice it. You cannot ignore this spirit. And so as a Black voice rises up, as somebody is killed and you want to do some kind of ritual to celebrate their spirit, or you want to vent a little bit on the spirit, that's what these sound suits do. So they're human beings that start taking on a spiritual identity. And in this ritual, making noise, making sounds, it's like, I'm going to make some noise and protest about what's happening. So here is a cool video, and you start seeing these figures move. I think that one of the points here is you can't kill the spirit. So if you have Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, or any George Floyd, can you really kill the spirit of these people? Or does their spirit come into something larger, something to be celebrated, something you can't ignore? So I'll let you enjoy that. Let's see if my cursor. So I think you get the idea of Nick Cave's sound suits. So here we have an homage to Trayvon Martin. And if you'd like to explore that a little bit more, again, he's trying to honor the spirit of these people. And so these people are not discarded. They haven't gone away. They've joined into a greater spiritual force. Now, next, we're going to look at a very interesting artist. Here you see a Gola, Liberia ritual mask. And this would be human size. So what's underneath the raffia are the grass. This is a human body. And this is a spirit that's been channeled for an African dance. When Afrocentric African tribal art is put into a museum, if it's just hung on a wall without music, without dance, without call and response, without smoke, without smells, without it being animated, it's almost like you've hung a dead body on the wall, because these pieces are meant to evoke life. And so if you were to go to the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, they have an excellent African art exhibit. But what they've done is they've included headphones, and you can hear the music and the ritual that's intended to go with these pieces, and see videos so the pieces are alive. And I really want to stress that these pieces are not Eurocentric hung on walls. Now, Eurocentric belief is that if you go to a concert, you sit quietly and listen to the music and go, oh, bravo at the end. In an Afrocentric concert, you get up, you dance, you might sing along with, you might make some noise, you might have some movement going on. And so these pieces are meant to seem like they give life. And that's a very important part of African art, tribal art. So I'm showing you this Oba from Nigeria, and you can see it's this woman who has this like elaborate headdress on. Or you might see this Luba Congo piece, and it's a rattle. Okay. Now, when you look at these pieces and you look at the next artist, I bet you can see her references. So Simone Lee is a contemporary artist, and she's really gotten quite famous as a United States artist because she was invited to be in the Venice Biennale. It's in Venice, Italy, and it's every 2 years. And it's the best artists from all over the world. And she's the first Black female to represent the United States, which is a huge, big deal. And I'm really proud of her. So what you can see here is that you can see in this figure, the original figure of Gola, Liberia, and you can see the raffia skirt, but look at that body language. She's got her hands on her hips. This is a strong woman. She ain't putting up with nothing. And the skirt, as it's wide like that, is intended to be enough room for children to be under. And in some of these rituals where you might have a skirt like that, there would actually be little kids hiding under the skirt, scurrying out during some part of the ritual. So she's this strong maternal mother figure. And you can definitely tell there's a female opening there in the face so that she receives things as a mother, as a strong woman, as somebody who's not going to be deterred, somebody who's going to protect her children. And of course, with all the young men being shot, the young 15-year-old kids being shot, Simone Lee is really thinking about, standing up to protect the children. Here you see that she also celebrates Black hair, that's a thing. And so she'll have these elaborate hair pieces or head pieces. And the woman doesn't have a face because she's not a particular woman. She's kind of every woman. And so you have this face that could be any woman with this like regal, almost like a headdress on, right? Well, when you see these, look at the scale of this. She's not fooling around. This is a very large piece that will become a bronze piece. So it's one part of a larger statue. And so she will make this strong, large, huge Black female who's going to tower over everybody else. And, I think she's a pretty cool person. Let's look at this piece now. This is a Nigerian applique, and you can see that there's this really flat patterning going on, really bright colors. Pieces of fabric are sewn to make these applique fabric pieces. And you can also see here in the West African cloth, West Africa has a lot of trade going on, right? Because the Portuguese sailors early on sailed down the coast of Portugal and the coast of Europe and came down the west coast of Africa. So there was a lot of trade going on. In these kind of West African print cloths, a lot of it's political and a lot of it is kind of a subtle message that's in the cloth. And in this case, the bird being free, not being caged, being let go, being let free. So this Nina Chanel Abney picks up on these Nigerian pieces and these West African pieces to make very large murals that are very in your face about police brutality. And she really doesn't hold back. You can see, there's poo-poo and there's oink and there's messages that are meant to be pretty blunt. Interestingly, she was in grad school and she was the only Black female, the only Black in her grad school class. And she got to thinking about the disproportionate number of Blacks that are incarcerated and how few whites are incarcerated and how that affects culture and family and society for generations. And so she did this piece where she made a cage and she locked up all of her white counterparts, classmates, and she became the warden for a day. And it's like, how do you like it? Let's flip the table. So she's always been like a button pusher, which I appreciate about her. So she takes these very, very strong images of violence and kind of mixes it with an Afrocentric view. She's not trying to be Eurocentric. She's not trying to use perspective or portraiture. She's definitely trying to do this flat pattern that recalls in these West African cloths that have political messages in them. And so you might see marks of the number of people who have been shot or killed, or the idea of bow down, or the idea that there might be blood on the pavement. And you can see here, pow, pow, the sound of guns going off, somebody who's, bleeding or shot or crying. And so she's done a lot of work with Black Lives Matter, as a lot of these artists have. They've supported Black Lives Matter either through their own artwork or through donating pieces to get money for, the movement to expand. So she's kind of an interesting person that you could follow. I have to admit that Sanford Biggers, I've been following his work for a while. He was a VCU professor, visiting artist not too long ago, and he's quite brilliant. He won a MacArthur Award. A MacArthur Award is you wake up one day and they call you and say, hey, you're a genius. Here's $500,000, $500,000. And people in your field nominate you, but you don't apply for it. And you're considered an American genius. So this piece is called Lotus, and it's a large piece of sandblasted glass supported by a metal frame, weighs 600 pounds. Now, Biggers lived in Japan for several years and is a Buddhist. And the lotus in Buddhism is a symbol of purification and transcendence, of getting past things. It's a symbol of purification because the lotus flower floats on top of the water, and it'll have a very, very long, deep root that goes down into the mud, and it purifies the water as it comes up into this beautiful white flower that opens with leaf after leaf after leaf. And each opening of the leaf is like another lifetime has passed. And so when the lotus closes at night and opens up again, it's like a rebirth. So this idea that you can purify muddy waters, purify things that are kind of dirty into something beautiful, and it's an act of meditation. This may also look like an eye to you. And in fact, whenever you have something in art like this, it's called an oculus, Oculus, ocular. Like if you're in a building and you look up and it looks like there's a hole in the ceiling where you see the clouds architecturally, that's an oculus. So it has the idea of an eye of God. When you're standing in front of this piece, the opening, the pupil of the eye would be about face level. And that's important when you get up close to it, because up close, you see that this lotus is actually sandblasted with this design. Now, I wonder if any of you have figured out what this design actually is. And if you look closely, there's all these little people, little figures. And this is the diagram of how you would pack a slave ship during the Middle Passage, as people were brought over from Africa to, the US, and they would pack them this tightly in the bottom of the ship. You would lie on planks and you would be shackled to these planks, and you ain't getting up to go to the bathroom. So if you pee or you poop, you're peeing and pooping right there next to somebody else. If the person next to you is seasick and they're throwing up, they're barfing on you. If somebody next to you dies, you're shackled to a dead person. And this would be how you would spend the entire voyage going across the ocean. And so Biggers and this was like for economics, this is the most economical way to pack Black bodies into a ship. And if some of them die, then let's see how many we can save. So Biggers takes this horrific image of suffering and pain and abuse, and turns it into this, kind of transcendent meditation. And honestly, when I first saw this, I was shocked by it. I paused because I'm often shocked by his work, and it takes me a second to kind of catch up with him. So much work about these issues could be angry and resentful and combative, and understandably so. But Biggers manages to make it something to look past, get past, to acknowledge it and acknowledge the pain, but somehow purify yourself so you're not carrying this generational trauma with you. And is it possible for us to see past this, like recognize it, see it? The sandblasted images in white almost seem ghost-like or spirit-like, so you're still acknowledging it. I have to admit, when I first saw this piece, I did think about, I had this weird feeling. What if I took a hammer to it? Like I wanted to, oh, I don't want to see this. I want to break through it. And I think that it becomes this like looking glass or this mirror to reflect on. He also did these in black metal, where the figures are cut out of black metal and they start looking like blades. And the metal makes it seem harsher and darker than this, which seems so much more spiritual. Well, you can't count on Sanford Biggers to stay in the same place twice at all. He has this new series, and he's probably moved on by the time I speak like this, but he's inspired by Underground Railroad quilts. And of course, what happened during pre-Civil War and during the Civil War, when slaves wanted to escape, there were often people, whites, that were allies and sympathetic and would hide them and put them into the Underground Railroad to get them up north so that they could flee to freedom. And one of the things that would happen would be people would make these quilts. Now, quilts that you might think of, some nice little old grandma putting a quilt on the bed. Quilts have always had a political history, where women who really didn't have a voice would make certain patterns and certain colors in certain ways, and they would be known to kind of communicate different ideas. For instance, one quilt pattern was called Drunkard's Path. And if somebody was running through for office and you didn't agree with them, you might raffle off a Drunkard's Path quilt to say, he's no good, he's on the wrong path. Well, during the time of the Underground Railroad, women would make these quilts and hang them out on the line, and the quilts would be a communication that it was a safe house. If you saw that pattern with those colors, you knew it was a language for a safe house. Now, quilts have always had stories in them. So in addition to the story of the Underground Railroad and it being a safe house, you might pull together scraps from your life and create a story about it. And so this idea that each of the people who have been killed by police have a story. You might take scraps of their life or have scraps of information from the media. And of course, this works on so many different levels, whether you trust the media or not, whether you have one viewpoint or another. And it works on all these different levels where people have their stories that are being told, and it becomes this real complex design of trying to talk about these issues. So I wanted to include that. But perhaps his most intense work to date to me is the BAM series. And he originally made the BAM series for specific people who had been shot by police. He now makes them kind of as an overall ritual for, there's just too many people. So he collected African statues, authentic tribal statues. And in some cases, he's reimagined them and figured them in bronze. So you think of Eurocentric bronzes like Roman bronzes or bronzes in art history museums. And here you have an African bronze with hands up, and any Black child, especially an urban Black child, knows that command, right? Like stay safe, hands up. And so he has this really weird kind of tension between something that's solid and durable and bronze and Eurocentric versus this African image that is almost like a ritual, hands up, and this moment of fear or terror that's caught in a moment. But even more importantly is how they get to be that way. So you can see that some of these are made really, really huge. How did he get a statue that was damaged like that? Well, in this link, we're going to see a BAM series. And so I just want to play it so that you can see and listen. I'm going to play that again. Now, unfortunately, I could play that again and again, not only for Philandro or Michael or Briona or George or so many people. So what he did was he took these African statues that are actually quite valuable, and he dipped them in wax to give them a skin. Like they're not just objects, they're in a skin, they're spirits in a skin. And he took them out to a shooting range, and actually he couldn't bring himself to shoot them, but he had his assistant, bam, 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 bam. And so you see this fragile, innocent figure, in this case, a colonial figure in shorts even, just get hit over and over and over again. And you're witnessing this violence. It seems like such violence to something that, isn't doing anything. And in one of my other classes, I showed this and we were kind of processing it. And people got really emotional about it. They said they felt really helpless. Like, why are you doing that? What's happening? And like they wanted to protect this, effigy, this image. And then there were some other students who were Black who said, after that conversation, I'm like, how do you feel about this? And they're like, I'm grateful. And I was kind of stunned. It's like, grateful. I would have never guessed that. And one girl said, yeah, I was always brought up that, if you were stopped by the police or, driving while Black, you put your hands up, you stay safe, you're, that whole fear-based, how do you keep your children safe? She'd been trained like that. And she was very grateful that her other classmates were feeling like such, we're so upset by seeing this innocent figure kind of blown away. So I think Sanford Biggers is a very interesting person because he can take something like, glass and sandblasting a diagram, or he can take a statue and shoot it, and all of a sudden it has all these layers of things for you to consider. In the piece that we just looked at here, what you see are one of the pieces that have been shot in BAM. And what he does is he takes them and he reimagines them or recasts them as these large bronze statues. They're almost totemic, like they're standing there as a testament that you may be able to shoot me, but I'm not going to go away. And you can see this figure looking, the person looking up to him as though they have somehow become larger than life and have not actually been killed. So he has made quite a few pieces, as you can see, like for Philandro, for Breonna Taylor, so he is an incredibly well-spoken man. He graduated with his MFA from Yale, and he teaches at Cambridge. University. Interestingly, he's been stopped by the police and held at gunpoint 3 times, one on his way to lecture to a class at Cambridge, which he finds kind of interesting. He also has done a TED Talk. I've done that with you in a good interview. He's just a brilliant man. I wanted to clue you in that you have the Dirty South with the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. It's going to be after classes are over, but it's Southern Black culture and how it's influenced art. And if you like the art in our environment with Meow Wolf or Burning Man, I'm not saying the museum is going to go that far, but they have some environmental art that's really cool. And then they have this big wall made out of speakers, and there's going to be a sound environment. So, you might be interested in the connection with the Dirty South on that. So that is a bit of Afrocentric art. You may see this page updated a little bit with 1 or 2 other artists that I'd like to add. I wanted to tell you that for this particular section, what I'd like for you to do is just choose one of these artists. Now, I will be adding some links for this that will have other Black artists that are important for the BLM movement and for the development of a Black voice in America. You'll see some links in addition to this page. I just have to update it. And what I want you to do is go through those links and find an artist that you're interested in. And I want you to take just one of their pieces. Now, someone like Sanford Biggers has a whole lot to talk about. Some of the links I'm going to provide you on this page when it's updated, there'll be like 10 artists that are really influential in the movement of the development of a Black voice in America. So they have big bodies of work. They have been written up a lot. There's no way you could do like a book report on their oeuvre, their collection. What I'd like for you to do is find one piece that really speaks to you. Now, this is art appreciation, not art history. I don't want a book report. I've been very impressed when I read your papers that at the beginning of this class, you found it hard to write about art and to write your opinion or see how your feelings and reactions aligned with the artwork and then kind of examine that to come up with an opinion piece. So I'd like for you to view the artists that will be in the links, find one piece by one artist that you like, and write a 1-page paper that kind of aligns how you see things with what the artist has presented and what the artist has made you think about as you look at the piece. And it's very much an open paper. I'm not going to tell you what to write, but I do hope that when you look at these artworks, with the dialogue in our country about what seems to be so deeply divided on issues of racial injustice, that we don't have to be divided when we come together to look at art. Sound good? I will write this up in an assignment for you, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. Take care.